We're right with you. The Morning Majority, 5 to 9 on 630 WMAL.
6:37 Tuesday morning in D.C. It's Brian Neiman, Jonah Goldberg, National Review, and this morning on the Morning Majority, Steve Hayward joins us now, energy expert at AEI, author of a slew of books, including a couple on Reagan, one on Jimmy Carter. Good morning, Steve.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
I'm doing great. So I'm curious, as a historian, what is your take on the president's speech last night?
Well, I couldn't get back a little tick he has in speaking. After almost every sentence, he flops his hands on the podium,
yeah, I noticed that.
And the microphone picks it up. And so I have a post up this morning calling him Thumper Obama, which is not his World Wrestling handle, but it really is a very big distraction that's making all his speeches land with a thud, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't as smooth a speech either. I mean, he stuttered and stumbled a couple of times, which is unlike him, I think.
I think he does not like this subject. He's not comfortable with foreign policy, and he'd just as soon get back to talking about health care.
Yeah. How do you think Reagan would have handled all of this? We asked the question a couple of weeks ago, what would George W. Bush have done? What do you think Reagan would have done?
Right. Well, of course, we know that Reagan ordered the bombing raid against Libya in 1986 after the evidence came out that he was behind the bombing of a disco in Berlin where a number of American servicemen were killed. Gaddafi shut his mouth after that for a few months, although he didn't stop his support of terrorism. In the Reagan years, they did ponder a number of schemes to try and dislodge Gaddafi from either covert action with the CIA, supporting rebels, or even a possible joint invasion with the Egyptians. They had to abandon those plans every time because they always leaked out somehow to the Washington Post. Reagan certainly supported the idea in principle of regime change.
Well, hey, Steve, it's Jonah. Nice to have you on. Just switching gears slightly, I thought we could sort of get into the topic of energy policy by, first of all, getting into how all of this in Libya actually affects energy policy. We had a caller earlier saying that this was a war for BP. I was wondering what you think about all that.
Well, Libya is actually kind of a marginal player. We didn't import any oil from Libya for a great many years. We had an embargo starting in 1981 that we'd only recently lifted. And of course, we haven't bought oil from Iran for over 30 years. Mm-hmm. That's the point about the oil market, is oil is fungible, and what counts is overall world demand and overall world production. Libya is a pretty small player. I don't think it really affects the oil markets that much, although the Europeans buy a lot more oil from Libya, so they're probably more interested in Libyan oil than we are, for certain.
What do you think? We get a lot of oil, which people don't think realize, from Canada and from Mexico. So there's clearly a lot of oil on this side of the planet. How much oil do you think we could get out of the United States now? Is it possible that we could be, I think it was Trump who said this, the Saudi Arabia of the world?
Well, look, there's this stunning report out just a few days ago from the Congressional Research Service, which isn't getting much attention. And, what you hear often from people is that, well, the U.S. only has 20 billion barrels of oil reserves, which is not very much. That's the official number. This Congressional Research Service report says we've actually got more like 150 billion barrels of technically recoverable oil. That means with existing technology. If we go look for it, which we haven't really done seriously for a long time because the government locks up so many places. And beyond that, we've got maybe as much as 1 trillion barrels of unconventional oil and things like oil shale, and there's problems with some of that. But that actually does put us in the Saudi Arabia league. So there's no shortage of hydrocarbons. It's only a matter of price and political will.
Well, speaking of political will, what did you make about Obama saying that he's all for offshore drilling in Brazil?
Yeah, right. That was Krauthammer's comment was great. Here Republicans say drill, baby, drill, and Obama says drill in Brazil. Yeah, Brazil, I looked up the numbers yesterday and was stunned to find that Brazilian oil production in the last 20 years has risen 800%. Oh. And their oil consumption has doubled. So they've gone from having to import 80% of their oil from overseas to nowadays they have a slight oil surplus, which is why they may join OPEC in a few years and sell it to us.
So, but that's essentially though good news though. We should be prodding them on, Brazil on, to go find oil. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We should be criticizing the president for saying drill in Brazil. We should be telling him, hey, how about drill here in the United States? But drilling off the shores of Brazil is good for the United States, right?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the point about energy is you want to have energy resilience in two ways: a lot of suppliers and a lot of different forms of it. And so, yeah, by the way, a very important point you just made, that our leading oil supplier is Canada, not Saudi Arabia. Number 2 behind Canada is Mexico. Now, Mexico's a little topsy-turvy these days, but they're not jihadi nations. And so, foreign oil, we ought to make distinctions about whose foreign oil we're talking about.
Hey, Steve, this raises a question I've always wanted to figure out. we're constantly told, ever since the Santa Barbara oil spill, that we need to sort of wean ourselves of oil. We need to be a leader in sort of moving away from hydrocarbons and all the rest. Is there any other country in the world with significant supplies of this stuff that isn't exploiting it?
No, and I mean, this is the fantasy of all this, is we're going to end up using almost all the reasonably priced hydrocarbons that are out there. All this talk of getting off hydrocarbons is still a fantasy. I mean, we're nibbling around the edges with wind and solar and biofuels and so forth. But the really big story in energy these days is not oil, it's natural gas. And we now have tons of it here in the U.S. when we used to think we were going to run out of that too. And so now the question is, how are we going to use this gas now that it looks abundant and a lot cheaper than we thought it would be just 5 years ago?
All right, Steve. Good to have you on the show. Appreciate your insights. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks, Brian.
Steve Hayward, fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, here on the Morning Majority. Brian Eaton, Jonah Goldberg in the